The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Biden and Beto, Kamala and Bernie, Pocahontas and Spartacus. Do the Democrats have anyone who can beat Donald Trump? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. As Washington awaits with bated breath for the results of the Robert Mueller special counsel investigation, a 15th Democrat announces for the presidential race, and he may be a white hybrid of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Barack Obama. And then there's the old standby reportedly preparing for a third presidential run, Joe Biden. Is he really the answer? We'll talk it all through, share some of the most humorous gaffes of Biden's gaffe-filled political career, and welcome in LibertyNation.com's crack political analyst Joe Schaeffer to review the bidding. Plus, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza jumps on board for Talkin' Liberty, featuring a significant decision on the death penalty.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. Washington and much of the nation awaits breathlessly for the Mueller report. The special counsel will at some point soon submit the report, and then it's up to the Attorney General William Barr to decide in what form to release it to the public. And while Democrats are gearing up for a major disappointment with no finding of Russian collusion with Trump after 2 years of investigations by Mueller's team that's dominated by partisan Democrats, and thus Democrats launching multiple congressional investigations of their own on Trump, there was this surprising assessment of a no collusion finding by not some conservative news outlet, but ABC's Terry Moran answering a question from Diane Sawyer.
How big a deal is it if they don't find collusion for the president?
Huge. He's cleared. The central and most serious question in this investigation, the reason Robert Mueller started it, is did the current president of the United States assist the Kremlin in an attack on our democracy? And if Mueller, after 2 years, comes back and says, I don't have the evidence to support that charge, that's a reckoning. That's a reckoning for progressives and Democrats who hoped that Mueller would essentially erase the 2016 election. It's a reckoning for the media. It's a reckoning around the country if, in fact, after all this time, there was no collusion.
So if the Mueller report, as expected, comes up empty on Russian collusion, just how much appetite will ordinary Americans have for more and more investigations of Trump and impeachment by the Democrat-run House? Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, already said this week that she's not looking to impeach.
If the Mueller report comes back with information, I don't think we should impeach a president for political reasons, and I don't think we should not impeach a president for political reasons. But you have to be ironclad in terms of your facts, and we'll see where that takes us.
There are, however, at least 60 members of the House who do favor impeachment, even as they admit they don't yet have the evidence to do it. As the field of Democratic presidential candidates continues to grow like a weed, we got the new hot progressive property, the boy wonder, the white male version of Barack Obama, or perhaps Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, throwing his hat into the ring this week. Beto O'Rourke, who's not a Hispanic but plays one in politics, has completed his extensive navel-gazing and decided to enter the fray as the 15th candidate to try and take down President Trump.
Amy and I are happy to share with you that I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. The only way for us to live up to the promise of America is to give it our all and to give it for all of us. We are truly now, more than ever, the last great hope of Earth. At this moment of maximum peril and maximum potential, let's show ourselves and those who will succeed us in this great country just who we are and what we can do.
Like most of these announcements, Beto says nothing of substance, but early signs are that he'll leverage his charming Obama-like personality and fundraising ability, which landed him $70 million in contributions for his Senate campaign against Ted Cruz in Texas, where he lost a close race. But there's so much pressure on these Democrats to toe the politically correct progressive line that they'll undoubtedly run into big trouble once the general election against Trump rolls around. Listen to a candidate who's supposed to be one of the most plain-spoken, independent-minded of the bunch, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, that's his real name. Listen to him repeatedly dodge what once was an easy question from Joe Scarborough on MSNBC.
Would you call yourself a proud capitalist? Oh, I don't know. Again, the labels, I'm not sure any of them fit. I'll break it down even more. Do you consider yourself a capitalist? Well, again, the labels, I'm a small business person, so that part of the system that you would call capitalist, I get it. Do you consider yourself a capitalist, and does capitalism work? Well, I think I don't look at myself with a label.
See, in today's Democratic Party, you are not allowed to even admit you're a capitalist. Meanwhile, President Trump decided to ground the Boeing 737 MAX jets this week after 2 crashes overseas by those planes in the last several weeks, prompting this interesting analysis from Matthew Continetti of the Washington Free Beacon on Fox News.
Trump is a security president.
Yep.
It's forgotten now, but terrorism and the security of the American people were a paramount issue in 2016. I think it's an underrated reason why he was elected that year, and he's taken pride in his flight record, a relatively safe record, very good safety record in the first few years of his presidency. He doesn't want to risk that. He wants to maintain his image of being the security president, and that's why he made this decision.
President Trump, a security president. It'll be interesting to see if Trump runs with that theme in his re-election campaign. Now, we hear an awful lot about fake news these days, but an even bigger problem may be the supposed solution for it: media curating by so-called fact-checkers with dubious intentions. This all started with an announcement by President Obama 2 years ago, and media analyst Mickey Huff said on Cheryl Atkinson's online show Full Measure that the cure may well be worse than the disease.
We're going to have to rebuild within this wild, wild west of information flow some sort of curating function that people agree to.
The whole fighting of fake news has become a Trojan horse to propel other agendas. And in the name of telling us what is fake news, we're also seeing more censorship. Whether, again, it's algorithmically, through bots, through filter bubbles, whether it's outsourcing fact checkers, right, like Snopes or PolitiFact.
But do you suspect there are special interests behind some of these efforts that are actually trying to shape opinion and do the opposite of what they say they're trying to do?
Absolutely. In the name of fighting fake news is purposely suppressing certain views, certain narratives, certain sources.
With a stunning percentage of people getting their news from Facebook, this puts tens of millions of people at the mercy of those who decide what is fake news and what is not. And you know one thing beyond all else: the fact checkers used by Facebook and the other media giants, Google and Twitter, are certainly not conservatives. And we close with something you thought you would never see or hear, as a scandal broke this week about college admissions bought and paid for by wealthy elitists who spend big money for their kids to cheat their way into elite colleges like Harvard and Georgetown by pretending to be athletes and getting hired guns to take their SAT tests. Arguably the most deranged anti-Trumpist in the media, CNN's Don Lemon, said this.
This is an America that can be deeply unfair, where hard work doesn't necessarily pay off, where if you have money, you can buy anything because just about everything is for sale, including integrity for sale, where a whole lot of people have real good reason to believe the system is rigged against them. Listen, this is what Donald Trump tapped into. And in a lot of ways, guess what? He was right.
Don Lemon saying Trump was right? What's next? Perhaps the Earth spinning off its axis. We will break away quickly, then come back with a look at the potential candidacy of Joe Biden. Is he the Democrats' elixir or pure poison?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel because
truth is
making a comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, if Joe Biden is actually preparing to enter the 2020 presidential fray as the closest thing Democrats can find to a moderate, he'll find himself pedaling alone in the bike lane on the far right of the Democratic primary superhighway with 4 clogged lanes of traffic roaring by to his left. Notwithstanding some who might try to argue that the latest Democrat dance craze, the white privileged young Beto O'Rourke, is a moderate, hardly a credible claim given his radical positions on climate change and guns, among other things, and his promise to actually tear down any wall Trump constructs on the southern border, Democrats seem intent on digging their own electoral grave in plain sight. Their top tier of candidates, Bernie, Kamala, Pocahontas, Spartacus, have all affirmed their support for nakedly socialist proposals ranging from a virtual government takeover of the economy through the Green New Deal to reparations for the descendants of slaves, abortion to the point of birth, open borders, sanctuary cities, and the list goes on. Oh, and since President Booker is a vegan, he'll take action to make sure you won't be able to eat meat either. What a mess. Enter Barack Obama's vice president with the best poll numbers early on, based primarily on name recognition. And the theory goes that if electability or suitability for beating Trump is the sole premise upon which to base a nominee, then perhaps Biden is the only one who can soothe the savage left-wing beast and serve as the voice of reason and carry the Democrats' banner into the inevitable white-knuckle street fight with Trump. Now, on paper, that might make some sense. But remember who we're talking about here. There are so many problems with Joe Biden, it's hard to enumerate them all. But let's give it a shot. Front and center is the immutable fact that in a party where gender, race, and youth are the currency of the day, old Joe is a 76-year-old plain rapper white guy. And then there's the gaffes, or breathtaking statements by the former vice president. Remember, clean and articulate? Imagine if Biden were to call Obama today what he did in 2008.
You got the first sort of mainstream African American who was articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy.
Clean? Clean? What exactly does that mean? Okay, then there was this.
Chuck Graham, state senator's here. Chuck, stand up, Chuck. Let him see you. Oh, God love you. What am I talking about?
That guy he asked to stand was in a wheelchair. Oh, and let's not forget when he was caught saying this to a guy of Indian descent.
You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.
Then there was the time he mistakenly put a woman in the grave.
The Taoiseach knows a lot about it. His mom lived in Long Island for 10 years or so. God rest her soul. And although your mom's still alive as your dad passed.
Okay. Those are hilarious in demonstrating the utter haplessness of Joe Biden, but not all of his verbal gaffes were so harmless. Like the time during the 2012 campaign when he warned a black audience of the ill intentions of Mitt Romney and Republicans in reducing Wall Street regulations.
He's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
Put you all back in chains. Yes, that was the plan of the radical right-winger Mitt Romney. Of course, none of these head-shaking verbal gaffes are enough to disqualify Biden or even move him off his perch as the theoretical frontrunner in a field that's now grown to 15 candidates, 13 announced and 2 others in the so-called exploratory stage. But those who think the fact that Biden was an appendage of Obama makes him electable have evidently failed to consider that Biden crested around 1% and failed to capture a single delegate, not one, in 2 previous presidential runs that could only be characterized as dismal failures. His 1988 campaign ended in the disgrace of plagiarism. In 2008, he quit the race after finishing at or near the bottom of every early primary. In Biden's attempts to break away from the progressive pack and take it to the House on the strength of his ordinary guy persona, his voice will almost certainly be drowned out, and he has hardly shown the guts to stand up to the vicious rhetoric of the radicals in his party. Exhibit A is a recent incident in which Biden was vilified by leftist Cynthia Nixon for calling Vice President Pence, quote, a decent guy. Biden responded within the hour with this apology: you're right, there's nothing decent about being anti-LGBTQ rights, and that includes the vice president. Some backbone. So, is there any appetite at all for a recycled remnant of the good old days of Obama's fundamental transformation of America? Is this 2-time loser the answer? Could the Democrats really be that desperate? We'll take a quick break and then come back with Joe Schaeffer, LibertyNation.com national correspondent, to review the bidding in the ever-growing Democratic field of presidential candidates.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel because
Truth is
making
a
comeback.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
So we've discussed Joe Biden and what his candidacy brings to the table for Democrats trying to take down Donald Trump in next year's presidential election. Biden is not even in the race yet, but 15 Democrats are. And you can't tell the players without a scorecard. And here to provide us with exactly that is LibertyNation.com's astute national correspondent, Joe Schaeffer. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate it. Let's start with what I call the Democrats' latest dance craze. Beto, a.k.a. Robert Francis O'Rourke. Are you like me in that he seems to come off as sort of a white male version of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and maybe Barack Obama?
I can see where you're coming from with that. I actually think that may be giving him a little too much credit. I don't think he's even inspiring to progressives, even though that's the idea is that he is. He seems very conventional to me. When he announced his exploratory committee, he said, "I was born to do this." I mean, that
very modest statement.
Modest, but it's also that is just very tone deaf for what America is looking for in the 2020 presidential election. They don't want a guy who feels like he's been ordained to be president since birth. That's what he's supposed to be doing. And I look at, and I think they're all kind of like this way. The whole field. They're uninspiring. They seem to be career politicians. You know, I picture the 2016 Republican field without Donald Trump. And you just remember what a collection of mediocrity that was. And I just see a bunch of Democratic Santorums, Rubios.
You say that the 2016 field was a bunch of mediocrities, but it really was. The field included a number of candidates who had distinguished themselves in one way or another as, you know, a consequential governor like Jeb Bush, even if you didn't agree with what he did, or Scott Walker, or a guy like Ted Cruz, who had already been on the stage nationally. But this field, it seems to me, they're all introducing themselves to the American people, except for Joe Biden. Now, one other thing, you say that Beto O'Rourke does not excite the base, but look at the fundraising that he was able to do against Ted Cruz. He raised over $70 million and lost very narrowly in a state, Texas, that's hardly progressive. I mean, doesn't that fly in the face of what you're saying, that he doesn't really excite the progressive base?
I think we're going to see with the debates just how Kennedy-esque this Kennedy figure is. I think people are going to realize fairly quickly that there's not a lot there. And yeah, you know, he had a targeted campaign. He did well with that kind of blue vote, you know, urban Democratic voter that will help him in the primaries. But what is he going to say that's going to inspire people? I haven't heard any of it. You know, when Trump entered the field, he was like a guy crashing a really dull pool party and doing a cannonball from the high dive. And who is going to be the Democrat who does that? Can you picture any one of these Democrats, including Beto O'Rourke, being that guy? That's what the Democrats need, and they don't have it at all right now. Who's going to be their breakout star?
Well, let's talk, speaking of breakout stars, because he once was that and now is looking for lightning to strike twice. That would be Bernie Sanders, who gave Hillary Clinton, of course, quite a run for her money in 2016. Is the time now ripe for Bernie the second time around, or has his time come and gone?
I think the latter strongly. 2016, he tapped into something that Trump tapped into even more. But, you know, Hillary Clinton was the perfect foil also for what he was selling. Now he's got a bunch of lesser than Hillary Clinton types saying a lot of the same things. And he's veered away from his kind of working class appeal, and he's going along more with the conventional identity politics thing, and that's not gonna work. So I think his time was 2016. He's older. Democrats want someone younger, more inspiring. Well, the younger thing is what Beto is pretty much the only thing he has going for him, I still believe. But I think that's going to really hurt Bernie. People have heard his message before. And I don't see 2020 being good for him. I also don't see it being good for Joe Biden. I think the Democrats want generational change, and I think that's going to hurt Biden and Bernie specifically.
Now, you talk about younger faces, newer faces, and one of those is Cory Booker, who has the senator from New Jersey who's taken on a rather radical edge to his campaign, saying, for example, that he's a vegan who won't eat meat and that the country needs to do exactly what he's done, follow suit, make meat inaccessible, illegal even. Does this self-proclaimed Spartacus bring anything to the table that makes him worth the Democratic nomination?
Yeah, I don't see how those are important things concerning what's going on in the country today. You know, I don't really particularly care what he eats for dinner. What is his plan to save the working class, the middle class? And what has this guy actually accomplished in politics? You know, we hear his name. It seems like we've heard his name for so long as this dynamic guy doing stuff. And then he's never done anything. He has nothing that he can hang his hat on. It's a criticism of a lot of these candidates. What have they accomplished? We have a lot of senators in this Democratic field who have not distinguished themselves in the United States Senate. I think Cory Booker is at the top of that list.
So let's summarize the bidding here, Joe. What Democrat, in your mind, has the best chance of knocking off Donald Trump? And how vulnerable is Trump, do you think?
Trump is vulnerable if he has a strong candidate to run against him, and that's why I think it's the best thing he has going for him is the Democrats. They just will not focus on the things where he is vulnerable on. I'm not blaming him. I think he's got so much to deal with, but he has not accomplished some of the things that he said he was going to accomplish. The wall is still not being built. We haven't pulled out of our foreign policy engagements like a lot of his supporters wanted. They can focus on these things, but I don't know if Democrats can focus. That's their problem. They're going to get caught up in identity politics, and they're going to have to play to their leftist base so hard to win this nomination that it's going to be very hard to suddenly turn around and seem reasonable to the rest of the country after running so stridently left. I think he's going to end up running against a conventional progressive who's talking, the bland things about, race and sex and, hey, let's unite everybody. Meanwhile, the working class is struggling. The middle class is disappearing. And nobody's talking about that.
All right, but you've sidestepped my question, Joe. What Democrat has the best chance of knocking off Trump?
It's a very dull field. What they need is for something in the debates to really shake things up, and one of these Democrats to step up and sound like a statesman. Now, who do you think in this field is going to sound like a statesman or a stateswoman? You tell me, Tim. I'm sorry, I'm not done.
I'll tell you what. I'll give you the.
I don't have an answer.
I'll give you the same answer that Dwight Eisenhower gave when they asked him what Richard Nixon had accomplished as vice president. He said, "Give me a couple weeks and I'll get back to you on that." Joe, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tim.
Joe Schaeffer, national correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Break away for a moment, then we'll come back with Scott Cosenza and a pivotal decision on the death penalty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now it is time, some would say beyond time, for us to welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza for the portion of the program which we call Talkin' Liberty, as we examine threats and hopefully promising developments regarding your liberty. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
Okay, California Governor Gavin Newsom announces something that reasonable people might actually be able to agree on. Not all of them, but some, a moratorium on the death penalty.
It is a amazingly great day for liberty, Tim, when the state says that they're no longer going to kill people that they don't have to. And what I mean by that is they're not protecting someone who's actively attacking someone else. They're in a cell. We need to figure out a way to deal with these people. We know for sure that most likely innocent people have been put to death in America by the authorities, and we don't have to do it. And, you can imagine what it must feel like to go to the gas chamber or the electric chair not having done what you've been accused of doing. It's the biggest imposition on liberty a state can make, and it's a great thing that Newsom is doing away with it. He said in his remarks that he was not comfortable signing any death warrants, knowing that there are likely innocent people on death row.
We know that programs like the Innocence Project have targeted people on death row with DNA technology that's exonerated them. But do we have any actual case of someone who was put to death and then we subsequently found out that they definitely did not commit the crime for which they died?
Cameron Todd Haynes, I think, is the name of one guy who was accused of burning down his house with his wife and children in it. And there's a lot of evidence. That's the case that I think sort of resonates with me, the more modern case, that he didn't do it. But it's not like what I think you're asking for is there's DNA or film evidence that shows somebody else, in fact, committing the crime. I don't know that is quite on point. But if you look at these cases and you look at the evidence, and you look at the quality of justice that they received in a lot of them, it will shock your conscience when you read about the DA who acted inappropriately and lied, or the police officer who later admitted to lying, and these sorts of things.
Or suppressed exculpatory evidence.
All you have to know, Tim, it's not about them being evil. They're just humans, okay? And that's why we can't trust them with putting people to death, because they make mistakes, and they have all the human frailties that we all have.
Well, do tax collectors have those same frailties?
Yes, they do.
They're chasing. Big headline here, banner headline, Scott. Alert the media. New York State raises taxes and people leave the state. I'm shocked and appalled at this, but it turns out that tax collectors are chasing those who leave New York to their newfound homes.
You know, I started to read, Tim, during the Obama administration about more and more people who expatriated themselves. They renounced their U.S. citizenship and moved abroad for tax reasons. And I was shocked because I read these stories about how the U.S. was trying to go after them and basically say, well, yeah, we know you don't want to be, with us anymore, but we still want your money. And so they created all these rules that basically forced people to pay like a fee almost to leave the country. And I just thought it was really gross and un-American. If you don't want to be an American anymore, go with good wishes. And now this seems to be the case with the state of New York. You want to leave New York and go to a low-tax jurisdiction? Not so easy,
sir. Your lovely parting gift is to have New York tax collectors chasing you to North Carolina.
Giving you a colonoscopy on the way. That's exactly right.
This particularly applies to New Yorkers who are moving to Florida, right?
Yes,
more than any other state.
But also just low-tax jurisdictions. Florida seems to be the most popular. But any low-tax jurisdiction, they are investigating veterinary records to see where people take their dogs. So what they're trying to do is to say, you're not really leaving the state. You've just, as a ruse, moved sort of your corporate personhood to another jurisdiction that's a lower tax, but you really want to stay in Manhattan or whatever. And that's what these investigations are.
And I bet they'll come up with a lot of people that are doing exactly that, because I've known people that have done that.
Sure,
at a distance.
Certainly,
of course. I love how Governor Cuomo, the astute governor of the Empire State of New York, said, quote, tax the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich. We did. Now, God forbid, the rich leave. He acts as if it's like surprising somehow.
Yeah. The one thing we can say is that the gentrification threat, Tim, has abated somewhat. So the progressives can rest easy on that count anyway.
Philadelphia, your home base. Still call yourself a Philadelphian. Why, I don't know, but you do. Philadelphia now banning cashless stores.
This is a progressive left thing that they want to prohibit stores from acting in a way that will stop sort of the least people in society from entering those stores in terms of their availability to get resources, right? So the homeless people and people on the margins, they don't have ATM cards or bank accounts where, well, they can use those electronic forms of payment. The problem is that if society wants to give those people a benefit of being able to use whatever money they have, Tim, that should not be burdened on the backs of the shopkeeper. That's what the city of Philadelphia is doing here, and it's impermissible, I think, imposition on liberty. It's so typical of these do-gooders, Tim. It's in the worst neighborhoods where you want somebody to be able to open a business and not have to worry about the threat of robbery, which is endemic and it's just ever present. You go into these bad neighborhoods.
I mean, robbing convenience stores is as American as apple pie.
There's a reason why
the
stereotypical ghetto store is like this 4 inches of bulletproof glass, right? It's because of the cash. If you take the cash away, you can actually maybe see some more economic activity that's not based in the black market spring up there, right? But they can't see that. All they can see is this one-step thinking, and as you like to say, and unfortunately, all that does is then in turn hurts the community, gives more power to government, and more reason now for a government bureaucrat to go into a business and fine them and make it harder for them to employ somebody in the community. It seems like it's bad news all around.
Now, just moments ago, we had kind words for California Governor Gavin Newsom for suspending essentially the death penalty. But let's not forget, this is still California. So, of course, the burgeoning Airbnb movement, where you can rent a house and stay there for a limited amount of time, is now falling victim to the strict rental rules in Southern California.
Yeah, this is a case out of the Ninth Circuit, and I thought it was, we have a lot of legal activity out there in America about these localities that want to restrict Airbnbs and restrict how people use their property. And unfortunately, this was a loss for freedom when the Ninth Circuit basically said that Santa Monica's onerous restrictions on Airbnbs, including being part of this like city licensure program, were legal, and basically said that Airbnb was not going to be able to have the freedom to operate without these massive restrictions.
It's a win-win situation for everyone around. The homeowner gets to make a little income when he's away. A person looking for a place that's a little more than a Motel 6 and less than the Ritz can find a home that's not being used. I mean, what could go wrong?
If you're in the hotel industry and have politicians in your pocket, and that's what the story is there. Much like the taxi cab industry with Uber, it's an almost identical analogy.
It really is.
And those are the same people in the same pockets, and I think that's the same reason why we have this result.
But I will say this, that Uber and Lyft have made taxi service better. They've become more responsive. They pick up their phones quicker. They send you maps of where the driver is. The vehicles tend to be cleaner. So the competition, as always, is a good thing. Now, this week, the big news was Beto O'Rourke getting into the race, plus a lot of talk about Joe Biden probably getting in as well. But let's not forget Pocahontas. Can we ever? She has proposed, Elizabeth Warren has, breaking up Amazon, Google, and Facebook.
She is a declared candidate for president. It seems like this would be a core tenet of what she would then be going forward with. And it's the most successful companies of our day that she thinks that she knows how to run better than they do, to the benefit of the customers that made them the most successful companies. Mm-hmm. And I think it's such a great imposition on liberty. Venezuela, Tim, it didn't just happen. It's not just a series of bad luck decisions or something that, caused them to be in dark and starving. It's because of socialism, and it's because of government bureaucrats and politicians thinking that they can run companies better than the people who built those companies.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio Plus, LibertyNation.com's own podcast. There are two of them now. The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, hosted by Mark Angelides. They are available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.